Through the Eye of the Needle is the story of my late mother, Esther Nissenthal-Krinitz, who is a Holocaust survivor who told her story of survival in a series of remarkably beautiful, vivid, colored fabric, collage, and embroidered pictures. Unlike many other Holocaust survivors, my mother always talked about her life, growing up in a little village in Poland before the war, and her remarkable story of survival during the war. My mother grew up in a little tiny village in the center of Poland, and when she was 12 years old in 1939, the Germans invaded her village. They came straight to her village and occupied it for 3 years. And in 1942, when my mother was 15, the Germans ordered all the Jews of my mother's village and the surrounding area to report to a nearby train station. My mother didn't want to go though, and the night before she begged her parents to think of a Polish farmer that she could go to work for. She didn't know what was going to happen. No one knew exactly what was going to happen to all of the Jews, but having lived under German occupation for 3 years, my mother knew it wasn't going to be good. So she, after getting the name of a friend of her father's, she took her 13-year-old sister, and the two of them said goodbye to their parents, and they never saw them again. So all my life, when I was growing up, my mother always talked about her experiences, not only how she survived the war, but also her childhood before the war. And she created for me this incredible world, because I was growing up in New York City in the middle of the 20th century, and my mother, who was actually only 20 years older than I was, my mother grew up in another century, in another world, really, in which everything was done by animal and people. There were no machines, no electricity. So her stories were really mesmerizing to me and to my sister. But when she was about 50, my mother decided that she really wanted my sister and me to see what her home and her family looked like. She had never been trained as an artist. She never learned to draw, but she could sew anything. She was just incredibly gifted at sewing. So she took a large piece of fabric and she sketched out her house and her neighbor's house, and she filled it in entirely with stitches, beautiful crewel embroidery stitches. And when she was finished, she gave that piece to me, and she made a companion piece for my sister. And about 10 years later, she set that aside, but about 10 years later, so now she was in her early 60s, she went back to these memory pictures. And this time, though, she started adding stitched narrative captions to the bottom of each picture. And she just kept telling her story one after another, until she had created this incredible series of 36 pictures altogether. The pictures are now part of a traveling exhibit that's traveling to museums around the United States. The film, though, tells the story, not only my mother's story of survival and her childhood and her arrival in the United States, but the film also tells the story of how my mother came to create this remarkable body of artwork. It includes video footage of my mother telling her story, as well as commentary by my sister and Helene McQuaid and me and other expert commentators as well. It's an incredibly beautiful film that tells a very powerful and moving story, and I hope that you'll join us.